The prosecution wrapping up their closing arguments in the hush money trial after nearly 5 hours. Prosecutor Joshua Steinglass calling the testimony of Hope Hicks, Trump's longtime trusted aide, devastating. Remember that Hicks told the court that Trump said this about Stormy Daniels in the story, that it, quote, would have been bad to have that story come out before the election. Steinglass saying Hicks, quote, basically burst into tears because she realized how much this testimony put the nail in Mr. Trump's coffin. My panel is back with me. Karen, you and I are both in the courtroom that day when she started crying. I think we see things differently, though. I saw her as being generally overwhelmed by the entire process. And much people were very surprised that she began crying. It sort of floated out that final statement that she made. It almost seemed to be lost on her or the jury. You said something different, though. That really was the nail in the coffin. Why?
Yeah, look, for me, I try to experience things the way the jury would experience them. And so I heard Hope Hicks talking about, she was on the one hand saying things favorable for Donald Trump, that he loves his wife, he loves his family, he,
all worried about Melania. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. But on the other hand, I think she overall was honest, and she had to say what the truth was. And it just, the way it felt to me was exactly how Josh Steinglass described it, which is she had just undeniably said, of course, this was about the election, and he said to her he was glad that this didn't come out before the election. And that's when she started crying, and the prosecution sat down, and the defense attorney got up there and asked some question like, what's your job description, or some innocuous question, and she burst into tears. And to me, it just felt like, she just realized she just put the nail in the coffin for Donald Trump. It was really powerful. That's how it felt to me as someone who doesn't know, believe it or not, I don't follow as much as it seems like I must. I don't really know Hope Hicks or who she was, or it was just clear that she knew and was close to Trump, and that she was trying to be honest, but at the same time she couldn't deny that this was the truth.
And again, I saw her as generally overwhelmed by this whole process. Seemed to be her voice trembling throughout the entirety of the conversation, ducking around the former president. And yet, the strategy would have been, had I been the prosecutor, if I believed that had happened, I would have done precisely that. I would have sat down and not kept going, because I knew that would have been the moment I wanted to linger. But the prosecution, they didn't sit down after like an hour or two or three or 4 or 5 hours today. 5 hours, Tim, to summarize all that came in today. I wonder how that plays to a jury. Does that make it look like, you're trying so hard to explain that you're losing your persuasive credibility?
I think so. I mean, I love a prosecutor that's long-winded, the ones that go on that long, because I think it always helps me as the defense. And it's something that I even preview. I say, hey, look, they're going to go on for a very long time about this stuff, and the more time they spend on all of this other stuff and not talking about the main issue, the more you know that they have a problem here. And I think that when you do go on for a certain level of time, it sounds to me like the jury was paying attention because of the gravity of the case, but I've heard from some people in the courtroom that said the longer Steinglass went on, the more the chances for acquittal went up. So it is something where you have to be concise, and you have to be respectful of the jury's time. And the longer you go, you water down the arguments, because ultimately, whether you're going to convince the jury at closings, that's one strategy. But the other thing is you're arming them with the arguments that they need when they go back to deliberation, and when they want to convince the other jurors to come over to their side. And if you're giving them just so much stuff, I mean, so many attorneys they feel a compulsion to cover every single document, every single little piece, because they're afraid that they're going to sit down like, oh, I forgot to talk about that tiny little piece. But it's not always helpful.
Well, in that spirit, Gene, when you look at this, I mean, especially they need to rehabilitate Michael Cohen. There have been a lot of attacks on him and his credibility throughout the course of it. And they also had to follow in line what they had to prove. This is a falsified business records case. It's not a sex case. It's not a case about Michael Cohen actually being the defendant. They had to try to prove that there was a valuable contribution given. And to that end, Josh Steinglass made the case that the catch and kill scheme could very well be what got Trump elected. And here's what he said: "It turned out to be one of the most valuable contributions anyone ever made to the Trump campaign." Does that land to the jury, knowing they have to prove what they have to for falsified business records?
Absolutely. He is elevating this case from just a hush money case to how it affected greatly, possibly, one of the most important elections we've ever had. And I want to compliment the prosecutor on this. He did a couple of things that I thought were very important. One, he went through the documents and he went through the timeline, because that timeline from October 24th to October 28th, the text messages, communications, that is the heart and soul of this case. And he went through that very thoroughly. The second thing I would like to compliment him on is he reenacted, some people thought it was a gimmick. I liked it. He reenacted a 96-minute second. That would be a long one. That would be a long one.
And they still would have gone 3.5 hours longer, though, if he did 96 minutes.
It's getting late. But 96 seconds, not minutes. But he reenacted that moment. And I thought that showed the jury, one, it humanized him. He actually had the phone towards his ear, and he was showing the jury that you can talk about a lot of stuff in 96 seconds, not minutes. And the last thing he did was he focused on Costello. And I think the biggest mistake that the defense made is they called Costello as essentially their only and last witness. And I thought he corroborated Michael Cohen, because they were sort of doing a catch and kill with Michael Cohen and trying to browbeat him.
Well, there's the bigger picture here is whether they prove their case, even in light of all the nuances, the minutiae of everything. At the end of the day, 34 counts of falsified business records. And to quote the prosecutor, "We didn't choose Michael Cohen to be our witness. We didn't pick him up at the witness store. The defendant chose Michael Cohen as his fixer because he's willing to lie and cheat on his behalf." Will that resonate? Only the jury will know. Thank you so much, everyone. Up next, Robert